I never imagined a day would come when deputies would march up to our secluded mountain cabin, hands hovering over their holsters, and demand my wife step outside with her hands in plain sight. 2 officers stood on our wraparound porch, faces stone cold, as they announced they'd received a report of trespassing and breaking and entering. Behind them, smiling with smug satisfaction, stood Karen Peton, draped in a blazer pinned with little HOA emblems, the self-proclaimed queen of Pine Ridge County. "Officers," Sarah, my wife, said evenly. Her calm voice belied the slight tremble in her hands. "There must be some mistake. This is our property." Karen stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "These people have been squatting here for weeks. As president of the Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA, I have documentation showing this cabin falls under our jurisdiction. They haven't filed the necessary paperwork or paid their association dues." The lead deputy, tall and graying at the temples, turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, we'll need to see proof of ownership. Mrs. Peton here claims you broke into this property earlier today." Sarah didn't hesitate. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a folded document. "Here's a certified copy of the deed, officer. The cabin was transferred to me 3 months ago after my uncle, Robert, passed away. My name is right there. Sarah Mitchell, sole owner." I watched as Karen's smugness evaporated, draining from her face like water through a cracked dam. First came confusion, then panic. The deputy examined the deed carefully, then looked at Karen with clear irritation. "Mrs. Peton, this deed shows Mrs. Mitchell is the legal owner. Can you explain why you reported her for trespassing on her own property?" Karen opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. There must be some mistake. The HOA records." But she didn't get far. This was only the beginning of Karen Peton's spectacular unraveling. 3 months earlier, Sarah and I had been sitting in a lawyer's office in downtown Denver, still reeling from the news of Uncle Robert's passing. A forest ranger for 4 decades, he'd left Sarah's most cherished possession, a log cabin on 5 acres of untouched Colorado wilderness, complete with lake access and sweeping mountain views that could make a grown man cry. "The property is free and clear," the attorney explained, sliding the papers across his desk. "No liens, no mortgages. And it sits on private land that predates any homeowners association in the region." That first weekend, we drove up with hearts full of excitement and a truck loaded with supplies. The cabin was everything we'd hoped for, rustic but well-maintained, with a stone fireplace dominating the living room and windows framing the Rockies like living portraits. We spent the day exploring the land, imagining where to plant a vegetable garden, and debating whether to add a deck extension. That's when we saw them, small placards tucked here and there reading, "Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA. Community standards enforced." Sarah frowned. Uncle Robert never mentioned anything about an HOA. I shrugged it off. Probably just for the newer houses down the hill. This land been in your family since the 60s. How wrong I was. How dangerously, spectacularly wrong. 1 week later, our first encounter with Karen arrived. Sarah and I were hauling lumber from a collapsed shed when a spotless white Lexus SUV crunched up the gravel driveway. Out stepped a woman in her early 50s, blonde hair lacquered into a helmet that looked impervious to mountain winds. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp with authority, as though she was used to immediate obedience. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Karen Peton, president of the Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA." I wiped my hands on my jeans and straightened up. "Nice to meet you. I'm James Mitchell, and this is my wife, Sarah. We just inherited the cabin from her uncle." Karen's eyes narrowed. She produced an iPad and tapped through it with manicured nails. Mitchell, I don't see any transfer paperwork filed with the HOA. You do realize all property transfers must be approved by the board." Sarah stepped forward, jaw tight, the look she got when trouble was brewing. "With all due respect, Mrs. Peton, this cabin belonged to my Uncle Robert for more than 40 years. This is private land." Karen's laugh was shrill, like nails dragged across a chalkboard. "Oh, sweetheart, that's what they all say," Karen replied, her tone syrupy with condescension. "Every property within 5 miles of Pine Ridge Lake falls under our jurisdiction, and I already see multiple violations. Her manicured finger pointed like a judge's gavel. That lumber pile? Eyesore. Must be removed immediately. Your grass? 2 inches over regulation height. And is that a bird feeder? Those attract vermin and are strictly prohibited. She tapped furiously at her iPad. I'll send you the new resident packet. You'll also need to attend the next board meeting for occupancy approval. That a $5,000 transfer fee, plus your annual dues, $3,000, are already late. Before either of us could say a word, she spun on her heels and climbed back into her pristine Lexus, leaving nothing but dust and indignation swirling in her wake. Over the next several weeks, Karen's intrusions became routine harassment. She appeared unannounced, iPad in hand, inventing violations every time. Our firewood wasn't stacked to HOA standards. The American flag we'd hung from the porch was the wrong size. Even our pickup truck was too old and allegedly lowering neighborhood property values. This is harassment. Sarah fumed one evening after Karen spent 20 minutes berating us over our unapproved mailbox. Uncle Robert never had to deal with this garbage. That night, I pulled out my laptop and started digging. What I found changed everything. The Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA had only been formed 8 years ago, covering a shiny new development of oversized houses on the south shore of the lake. Our cabin, by contrast, sat on the north shore, up a private road carved into mountain in the 1950s. Look at this. I showed Sarah the county zoning records. We're listed as rural residential, not part of any planned community. We're not under HOA authority at all. Her eyes lit up. So she has no power over us? None whatsoever. The next time Karen showed up, we were ready. She marched up our driveway, face set in that familiar look of self-righteous determination, a thick stack of papers clutched in her hand. I've been more than patient, she declared, thrusting the papers toward me. These are your formal citations. $3,000 in fines for violations. You've also been scheduled for a disciplinary hearing next Tuesday. I didn't take the papers. Mrs. Peton, we've done our research. This property isn't part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here. Her face flushed scarlet. That's where you're wrong. I've been president of this HOA for 6 years. I know exactly where our boundaries are. Your uncle may have slipped through the cracks because of his age, but you too won't. Sarah stepped forward, her voice sharp as steel. Then show us the official HOA maps proving our property falls within your boundaries. Karen's jaw clenched. Those are confidential documents. Only board members have access. Then we'll request them from the county. I said evenly. In the meantime, stop coming onto our property uninvited. That's trespassing. Karen's laugh was harsh and bitter. Trespassing? I'm conducting official HOA business. But fine. If that's the game you want to play, don't come crying to me when the sheriff gets involved. She stormed back to her Lexus, snapping photos of our cabin and land as she went. I had a sinking feeling this was far from over. 3 weeks later, things exploded. I was in Denver for a work meeting, leaving Sarah at the cabin to tackle projects on her own. She planned to spend the day repainting our kitchen cabinets. But at 2 p.m., my phone rang. Sarah's name flashed across the screen. Yet when I answered, the first sound I heard wasn't her voice. It was the crackle of a police radio and men's voices in the background. James! Sarah's voice finally came through, steady but tense. You need to come back. Karen called the police and told them I broke into the cabin. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles went white. Are you okay? What happened? I'm fine. I showed them the deed. But James! She told them I was a dangerous squatter. When they came up the porch, their hands were on their guns. The drive back was the longest 90 minutes of my life. When I pulled up, 2 sheriff's vehicles sat in our driveway beside Karen's gleaming Lexus. Sarah stood on the porch, holding papers, while Karen lingered nearby, arms crossed, her foot tapping impatiently. I walked toward them, forcing my voice to remain calm despite the fury boiling inside. Officer, I'm James Mitchell, Sarah's husband. Can someone explain what's happening here? The lead deputy, A weary-looking man who introduced himself as Deputy Harrison looked as though he'd had more than enough of the situation. "Mr. Mitchell," Deputy Harrison said evenly, "Mrs. Pettibone here called 911 claiming your wife had broken into this property. She also stated she had documentation proving it falls under HOA control and that you were trespassing." I turned toward Karen, who lifted her chin with defiance, as if daring anyone to challenge her. "But," the deputy continued, "your wife has provided clear proof of ownership. The deed is in her name, properly filed with the county 3 months ago." "This is outrageous." Karen sputtered. "They haven't paid a single HOA fee. They haven't attended board meetings. They're in complete violation of—" "Ma'am," Harrison cut her off, his patience thinning. "Whether or not they're part of your HOA is a civil matter. What concerns me is that you made a false emergency call claiming a break-in was in progress. That's a misuse of 911 services." Karen's face drained of color. I genuinely believe the HOA records would show." "Show what exactly?" Sarah's voice was low and steady, her anger cutting sharper than any shout. "That you've been harassing homeowners who don't even fall under your authority? That you've been trespassing on our property for weeks." Harrison held up a hand. "Enough. Mrs. Pettibone, I strongly suggest you verify your HOA boundaries before making any further complaints. And Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, if the harassment continues, you have the right to file a formal complaint with our office." The deputies began wrapping up, but before he left, Harrison pulled me aside. His voice dropped to a confidential murmur. "Between you and me, this isn't the first time we've had trouble with Mrs. Pettibone and her HOA. You might want to talk to some of your neighbors." That evening, Sarah and I sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire. The adrenaline from the confrontation was ebbing, replaced by something colder, resolve. "We can't let this go," Sarah said firmly. "She could have gotten me shot today. If the deputies had been more aggressive, if I hadn't had the deed with me." I nodded, jaw tight. "First thing tomorrow, we're putting up security cameras. Every inch of this property will be covered. And we need a lawyer," Sarah added. "A good one. Someone who knows property law and HOA disputes inside and out." Over the next week, we shifted from being victims to investigators. 8 security cameras went up first, 4K resolution with night vision, covering every angle of the cabin and surrounding land. Then we started knocking on doors. The stories we heard were jaw-dropping. Tom and Ellen Brewster, half a mile down the road, told us how Karen fined them $3,000 for having the wrong color shutters. "We've lived here since 1995, Ellen said, shaking her head. That HOA didn't even exist back then. Mike Garza, whose family had owned a lakeside cabin for 3 generations, showed us a stack of bogus fines. She keeps insisting my property's in the HOA. But I've never signed a thing. County records prove I'm outside their boundaries. Doesn't stop her from trying." The breakthrough came when we visited Dorothy Chun, an 80-year-old widow who'd once worked in the county planning department. She adjusted her glasses and pulled out a set of old maps. "I remember when they set up that HOA," she said. "The boundaries were crystal clear, just a new development on the South Shore. Everything else was zoned rural residential." She leaned closer, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "But I've heard rumors the maps on file with the HOA don't match the ones of the county. Might be worth digging into." Armed with this new information, we met with Patricia Hawkins, a sharp attorney in her 40s who specialized in property and HOA law. She listened intently, jotting notes as we laid everything out. False 911 calls, harassment, trespassing, and possibly fraudulent documents, Patricia summarized, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "Mrs. Pettibone has exposed herself to both civil and criminal liability. What do you recommend?" I asked. Patricia's smile was thin, predatory. "We start by filing a formal complaint with the county about the boundary discrepancies. Then we demand full documentation from both the HOA and county records. If there's fraud, we'll uncover it." 2 weeks later, Patricia called, excitement in her voice. "You're not going to believe this. I compared the HOA maps to the official county records. They don't match. Someone expanded the HOA boundaries to include an extra 40 properties that were never part of the original agreement. Someone being Karen? Sarah asked. The alterations happened 2 years after she became president. Patricia confirmed. She's been collecting dues and issuing fines from homeowners who were never part of the HOA. That's not just fraud, it's racketeering. The very next day, we filed a formal complaint with the county. The investigation that followed was swift and unrelenting. Investigators interviewed dozens of homeowners, combed through financial records, and compared multiple versions of the HOA's boundary maps. Karen must have felt the walls closing in, because her behavior grew increasingly erratic. She sent us threatening letters drafted by the HOA's attorney, who turned out to be her brother-in-law. She convened special HOA meetings devoted entirely to the Mitchell problem. She even tried to get the local paper to smear us as dangerous outsiders threatening community values. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. County investigators discovered she had personally altered the digital maps, redrawing HOA boundaries to swallow up 40 properties that had never belonged to the association. Over 6 years, she had extorted more than $200,000 in illegal dues and fines. The county board of supervisors called an emergency meeting. The small hearing room overflowed with furious homeowners, many clutching folders stuffed with bogus fines and threatening letters. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her polished facade finally cracking. Her blazer was wrinkled, her makeup smeared, and her usual air control replaced with visible strain. The board chairwoman wasted no time. Mrs. Petton, the evidence demonstrates a clear pattern of fraud and abuse of power. Effective immediately, the Pine Ridge Lakeside HOA is ordered to cease all activities involving properties outside its original boundaries. Furthermore, all fines and dues wrongfully collected must be refunded, with interest. But she wasn't finished. This matter has also been referred to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. Forging official documents is a felony in this state. Karen let out a strangled sound, somewhere between a gasp and a shriek. You can't do this. I've worked for years to maintain property values. These people don't understand what it takes to run a proper community. The chairwoman's reply was ice cold. You've extorted money from dozens of families under false pretenses. Your fortunate fraud charges are all you're facing. The room erupted into applause as sheriff's deputies escorted Karen out. 2 weeks later came the moment we'd all been waiting for. Sarah and I were sitting on the porch, enjoying a rare peaceful evening, when our neighbor Tom texted, "Turn on Channel 9. You'll want to see this." The reporter appeared on screen, standing in front of the courthouse, wind whipping her hair. In a stunning development, former HOA President Karen Petton has been found guilty on all counts. The judge has sentenced her to 5 years in prison and ordered her to pay $450,000 in restitution to affected homeowners. The camera cut to Karen being led away in handcuffs. Her once perfect facade was gone. She looked hollow, her face etched with disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend how her little empire had collapsed so completely. "I'm innocent," she screamed at the cameras. "They don't understand. Without me, property values will plummet. The community will fall apart." But no one was listening anymore. Her reign of intimidation had ended. Not through some grand revolution, but through ordinary people finally standing up and saying enough. The last shot before the news cut to commercial showed Karen stumbling on the courthouse steps, one heel snapping as deputies guided her into a waiting police car. Her kingdom was gone.